Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Dynamics 365 Tech Talk. Today's topic is Dynamics 365 subscription billing, billing schedules, and invoicing. My name is Michaela, and I'll be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this session through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. This session is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. When you join this event, your name, email address, and/or phone number may be viewable by other session participants in the attendee list. By joining, you are agreeing to this experience. The recording will be available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. If you have questions for our presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions during and at the end of the presentation. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Brian King. Brian, over to you.
Thanks, Michaela. So as Michaela mentioned, if you have questions as we're going along, feel free to put those into the live event Q&A panel. We have Jodi and myself and Matthew will be watching those and responding to those as we go through. We'll also be taking common themes and addressing those at the end, so there'll be some time at the end here for Q&A as well. So as I mentioned, we've got Jodi Christiansen here. She's a senior program manager at Microsoft. She's also presenting with me. And then we have Matthew Brown from our solution architect team, who's helping in moderation. So he'll be out moderating and helping with questions. So our agenda for today, we're going to talk about the recurring contract billing functionality that's part of subscription billing. So that will consist of creating billing schedules, our billing frequencies, item types, pricing methods, invoicing, and then that Q&A portion at the end. So we'll start with a little bit on recurring contract billing. That's part of subscription billing. And the portions we're going to cover today are really the billing schedule and the invoicing. And just as a quick reminder, if you weren't at the first Tech Talk or if you hadn't watched the recording, subscription billing is in feature management. You'll need to turn it on. And then it also has 3 subkeys. So that would be the recurring contract billing, revenue and expense deferrals, and multiple element revenue allocation. So you'll have that, you'll see this in feature management here, and that'll be under the module for subscription billing if you wanted to filter down and find these things. And then one other caveat is if you have revenue recognition turned on in feature management, you'll need to turn that off in order to test this out and kind of follow along, if you will. So just a quick reminder on feature management for this particular feature. Today's session, we're going to talk about really the top portion of this visual you see here. So we'll talk about contract setup, we'll talk about invoicing and sales order creation processing, recurring sales invoices, and then the posting. In a future Tech Talk, we're going to hit the deferral schedules and the revenue and expense deferrals portion, and then we'll also hit the Mira portions. So those will be in a later Tech Talk. Today's Tech Talk is going to cover the top panel of this visual here. So we're going to start with some concepts. So we'll talk a little bit about the concepts, and then we'll dive into some product demos after that. So some of the concepts for recurring contract billing are really the frequency, the pricing, and the type of item. So those are the 3 main things that are going to determine when we bill, how we bill, and what we're billing. So with the frequency, we're going to be able to do this on a recurring billing basis or a one-time basis. And we can also automatically renew the contracts. Pricing-wise, we can do billing based on standard pricing, or you can use trade agreements. There's also custom pricing and tiered pricing that's available, and then you can do escalation or discount. And then we also have the different types of items. So we have usage, milestone, and standard.
All right, so the item types that Brian just mentioned are the 3 that we'll talk about today, and you'll see a demo with those as well. But we have standard items from inventory release products that you can use. There's also usage items, and there's 2 options that you can use there. One is consumption and one is reading. The consumption is just how much did they consume, in that billing period, per month or per quarter, however you set that up. And that's how you can do your billing. And then for reading, you could be reading such as a meter or an IoT device, something like that. You just enter that every month or every billing period, and you can bill based on that. So it's not just a set amount, but that's how you can use the usage items set up within subscription billing. And then we have milestone items. And with these milestone items, you can allocate the amount to different items based on the different end dates that you want to enter for those milestone items. And there's percentage allocation, you could do a variable amount or equal amount or percentage of completion. So you have four different options that you'll see today too in the demo. And the item type does default from the billing schedule group. Brian will walk through that as well, but it's just a default. You can change that on each of those billing schedule lines. And then for the pricing, we have quite a few different options in how we want to do our pricing for our billing schedule line. For the items that you add for the pricing methods, we have 4 different options. There's standard, flat, tier, and flat tier. A standard pricing method means that you can use the standard pricing from Dynamics 365. You can also use a trade agreement with the standard type as well. And then if you change it to flat, that means you can actually change the unit price to anything you want. So it allows you to just freeform enter an amount on that billing schedule line. It doesn't come from anywhere else. And then tier and flat tier are used with a trade agreement as well. So tier pricing means that for the quantity that you enter, you can base it on different tiers or price brackets that you have set up in your trade agreement. And then flat tiers, you basically have one price for any quantity in that price bracket. So if it's like quantity of 10 to 25, any quantity in that tier bracket would be the same flat amount. For advanced pricing options, we have the ability to offer free quantities and minimum and maximums by quantity or amount. So for the free quantity, you can offer for free quantity per month or every 3 quarters, once a year, and the customer gets that much free quantity per billing period. And then you can also do a minimum or maximum. Say you have a minimum charge of $5 a month or a maximum charge of $50 or something like that. You can do that by quantity or amount as well. So just different options for that flexibility. And then we also have the escalation and discounts. Escalation is just a price increase. You can base that on an amount or a percentage, or you can even base it on a consumer price index that is set up within subscription billing, or you can offer a discount, which again can also be an amount or a percentage. This is just an example of the trade agreement that you'll see in the demo a little bit later. Just wanted you to see what the trade agreement means. So basically there's a from and the to quantity, and these are the different tiers, or the price brackets is the word that I used before. So you can see that there's different amounts. So basically with standard pricing, it's cheaper the more you buy per item. And then tier pricing, we have the price bracket. So there's a certain amount at each level, and it's just added together and divided by the quantity to get that unit price. And then that flat tier basically means for any quantity in that amount, or in that price bracket, it'll charge the same flat amount.
Then the last topic we'll cover today is invoicing. So we'll go through a number of scenarios for invoicing. Those will be billing in advance or in arrears. We'll talk about consolidating all periods. So that'd be like the prior periods of a particular billing schedule. Consolidating by customer, consolidating by item. Then we'll do split by item group, or what's known as top billing. So for instance, maybe you want to build the top 2 lines. That's the scenario there. Excluding zero consumption, and then a free text invoice. So we'll go through all those different options in the demos today. So with that, we'll move forward with the demonstrations. We're going to start with a billing schedule creation demo, and I'll cue that up here. Today we'll look at the process of creating a billing schedule. Billing schedules can be created manually through Dynamics 365 user interface, through a support and renewal process, or through an entity. Today we'll focus on the creation of creating a billing schedule through the user interface. Before we create a billing schedule, we'll want to look at a few prerequisites that will help ease the process of creating a billing schedule. We'll start today by looking at billing schedule groups. A billing schedule group will default information for fields on a billing schedule header that can be passed down to billing schedule lines. These fields are the billing frequency. So this is how often do we plan to invoice the customer? One time, daily, monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, or annually. And then we have our billing interval, which is based on that frequency,
what is the number of times per that frequency. So in this case, we have 1 monthly. And we have our pricing method. This can be standard, flat tier, or flat tier. And we'll cover more depth on this topic in today's session as we get further along. And we have our item type. This can be standard, usage, or milestone. And we'll also spend some more time later in today's Tech Talk talking about the item types. Next, we have our usage option. So this can be consumption or reading. So this is for your usage items. Do you want to bill them based on the amount consumed, or do you want to base it based on a meter reading? Next, we have a milestone template. So if we had a milestone type line item, do we want to have a default template that applies to that line? Invoice separately. Do we want this invoice or this information to be kept separate from a consolidated invoice? Yes or no? Renew automatically. Do we want the lines to automatically renew? And then when we do, how many lines should be on each renewal? So for instance, maybe 12 months per renewal. Then escalation. At renewal time, do we want to escalate the price and raise the price? Yes or no? And then there's also the possibility for a discount there as well. In addition to billing schedule groups, we'll also have some parameters that need to be completed. So we'll take a look at recurring contract billing parameters that will impact the creation of a billing schedule. So the information here includes the billing schedule group that we should default when we create a new billing schedule. Do we want the schedule to align to the month ends? So align to month, yes or no? If there's a partial period, should we prorate? So that's where prorate partial periods will come into play. And what should that proration method be? Should it be daily or monthly? And then we have, when we create a billing schedule, should it automatically be placed on hold? So for instance, if we had credit checks or any kind of backgrounding of a customer that you need to do, you could do that and then remove the hold and then proceed with that billing schedule. Then lastly, what type of invoice do you want? Do you want it to be a sales order invoice or a free text invoice? So those are the options there. So these are the ones that will impact the creation of a billing schedule as we move forward. So now that we've covered the prerequisite setup, we can proceed to create a billing schedule. So we'll go ahead and open the All Billing Schedules form. And when we click New, we will get this flyout form that will have the required fields that we need to complete to create a billing schedule. So we have the billing schedule group, and that's what was specified in our recurring contract billing parameters. So it'll default in, and you have the option to override that billing schedule group. Next, we have the customer detail. So we can plug in the customer number here, and then we'll see the customer name will complete as we do that. If we have an end user account, we can pick a customer from our customer list that is the end user, and then their name will default in here as well. Then last, we have the billing start date. So we'll start ours on September 1st, and then maybe we want to run 12 months. So we can either enter the number of periods, or we can plug in the end date. So in either case here, I could either plug in 12 periods, or I could have plugged in 8/31/2023. So we'll click OK, and now the information from that flyout form will create the billing schedule, and we'll be able to add lines to the schedule. When adding lines to a billing schedule, we'll click Add Line here, we'll see that information from the header is copied down to the lines. So I'll just plug in the item number here. Then you'll see that our item type of standard comes from our billing schedule group. We have our start date and end date, which comes from our header creation that we just did. If we had a milestone template, we'd see that in here. We also have the ability to see the pricing method. So how do we want to price these? So you'll see our pricing method is over here as standard. Our billing frequency, which is monthly, and our billing interval of 1. And then we'll also see our prorate partial periods and our align to month settings here in the grid. And if we scroll down, we'll see in line details, we'll be able to see if we're allowed to auto renew, or if we're set up to auto renew, how many lines to renew at renewal time. So over the last few minutes, we covered the creation of a billing schedule, as well as the prerequisite setup that is used in that billing schedule creation.
So that's the first product demo that we had for today, and that one covered the creation of a billing schedule. The next one that we're going to look at is the billing schedule frequency. So that's going to look at the cadence of how often we're going to bill this particular billing schedule. So we'll jump into that.
Hi, in today's video, we're going to take a look at the different billing frequencies on a billing schedule. I'm going to pull up a billing schedule here, and we'll take a look at the different frequencies that are available. I've pre-filled and pre-populated some data here to help illustrate the different billing frequencies that we'll take a look at. So the options that we have are one-time, daily, monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, and annually. We'll take a look at each different one, starting with one time as the first example. So you'll see in my instance here, I've got a start date and an end date just following the calendar year, so 1/1 to 12/31. If we take a look at the billing detail here for our one-time billing line item, you'll see that we'll have one billing line detail here for $250. So we're going to bill it one time, and that's it. So for instance, if you had something like a hardware and services type scenario, and the hardware item was a one-time thing, you could use a one-time item, cover that particular piece, and then have the services be the recurring portion of that particular billing schedule. Take a look at our next item. This one is set to daily. In this case, if we look at our billing detail, we'll have a record for each day of the year. So 1/1 to 12/31. Moving on, if we look at monthly, we'll have a billing record here in the view billing detail for each month. So 1/1 to 12/31. In our next example, we have quarterly. So if we take a look at this one here, we'll have 4 billing periods running from 1/1 to 3/31, 4/1 to 6/30, 7/1 to 9/30, and 10/1 to 12/31. So we'll bill that 4 different times during the year. Our next record here is semi-annually. So if we look at our billing detail here, we'll have 2 billing detail lines, one from 1/1 to 6/30 and one from 7/1 to 12/31. And last but not least, we have our annual record here. So this one, in this case, will be one billing record detail here, which is 1/1 to 12/31 for $250 for the one time that we bill it that year. Then on any of these records, if you wanted to, on the renewals tab on the line details, you could mark these to be auto-renewed, and then you could have those renew based on the information you provide. So we have parameters that will control how many lines they have per renewal, and then if it should automatically renew or not. That's a quick overview of the billing frequency. Thank you for your time.
So there we saw a demo of the billing schedule frequencies. So I covered the different frequencies we have going from one time to all the way through annual. Our next demo will be on item types. So this will cover our usage, our standard, and our milestone item types. So we'll dive into that.
Let's walk through the different item types that we have with subscription billing on a billing schedule. I have my billing schedule header all set up, and I've added my customer, my billing schedule, start date and end date, and I have the billing frequency set to monthly. Let's move down to the billing schedule lines. I've added the first line here with a standard item type. That's the first item type that we have with a billing schedule line. Standard billing type, standard item type is just the standard item from inventory or released products. We have a start date and end date. You can enter the quantity. It defaults in your unit price from your released product, and your billing frequency is monthly. So it's a standard item type. The next one that we have is usage. Now on usage, we have 2 different ways to use that, either a reading option or a consumption. You can view that down here in the line details. So on the reading option, if I go to view billing detail, you can see how this works. The first time I entered the view billing detail, I entered an initial reading of 100 here at the top. And then in July, I had a current reading of 133. So this can be used if you have like a meter, or if it's a device like an IoT device you can use for measuring the amount, or the amount that's being used for each month for the billing. That's what the reading option will do. I'm entering these manually, but you can also import these amounts as well. So I've entered 133 for July, 178 for August, and then if I have the reading option available for September, then I would just go ahead and enter that. And then it calculates the consumed quantity and multiplies it by the unit price, and that's the amount that's going to be billed for that period. You can see that current reading defaults into the previous reading for the next line. So pretty simple for the reading option. The next one is consumption. With consumption, this is just how much do they consume for the month, and you're going to bill them based on the amount that they've consumed. So the reading option down here in the line details is set to consumption. I also have an estimated amount that can be entered. You can use that on the reading option as well. But the estimated consumption just allows you to fill in the estimate for the consumption, and you can calculate your revenue, or your predicted revenue, that way as well. Another option with these usage items is to use the advanced pricing. So if I go into the advanced pricing, I'll show you how you can set this up and then how it calculates. So what I can do on my advanced pricing, if I want to offer my customer 10 free quantity every quarter, so every 3 billing periods, I enter the free quantity and then the number of periods that it resets. So every 3 billing periods, they'll get every 3 billing periods, they'll get a free quantity of 10. We can also do minimum and maximum billing amounts, and you can do that by amount or by quantity. So if I want to do a maximum billing quantity of, let's say, 125, I can select that, enter my quantity of 125, and click OK. So now when I go to the view billing detail for my consumption, you can see I have an estimated amount of 75 each of my billing periods. Now, what I've consumed, let's just say for this one, I've consumed 100. So it removes the estimated amount when I enter my consumed, but I have a free quantity of 10, so it subtracts that off of my consumed amount. So for this first billing period, it will be 90 times my unit price, and then that gives me my net amount. Then, of course, for the next billing period, I have my 75 estimate again. How much did I consume? Well, if I try to enter 130, that's what I did consume, but my maximum quantity has been reached. So then it changes my billable quantity to 125. So that's how the advanced pricing options come into play when you're billing the customer. So it's very flexible in how you can enter that information. Then the last item type that we have is milestone. So I have the item entered here. I'm going to change my item type to milestone. This gives me a couple of different things that I see. So my end date is cleared out. Since you're billing a milestone, which is an event, a one-time event, the end date is blank. Once that event is complete, we can enter the end date, and then that's when you can bill the customer for that billing schedule line. You can see that the billing frequency does change to one time, and you can't change that because that is the one time that you're going to bill that line item is when that milestone has been reached. It also gives us the milestone allocation capability. So if I come into milestone allocation, if you want to spread that installation service out between a couple of different items, we can do that. And there's different methods that we can use. So I have percentage, variable amount, equal amount, and percent complete. So it just depends on how you want to bill that milestone. I'll just select percentage for this one. So 70% is going to go for my installation service, and then the rest of the 30% when training is complete, that I will bill that to my customer. So if I hit process, this spreads the installation services to the two other lines. So I have the 14 and the 6,000 available, but again, the end dates are blank. So when I'm done with the installation service and the training, I can enter the end dates and then bill my customer for those milestones. So that is a look at the 3 different types of items that we have for subscription billing: standard, usage, and milestone.
So there we saw the item types. And our next demo will look at the pricing. So if you recall earlier in the session, Jodi showed the spreadsheet or the table with some different pricing options there. We'll dive into those pricing options and take a look at how each of those can be set up and used.
In this video, we'll talk about the pricing methods that can be used for each billing schedule line and how trade agreements can affect them. Then we'll conclude by talking about the price escalations and discounts. I have my billing schedule set up, and I've added my billing schedule line for online storage. The default pricing method is standard, as that is what I have set up on my billing schedule group. That can be defaulted to something else. For my standard pricing method, my price is coming from the base sales price on my released products page. The unit price can't be changed with the pricing method of standard, but if you select flat, that means you can change the unit price on each of the billing schedule lines. So you can enter any unit price that you need to with the pricing method of flat. I'll change this back to standard, and then we'll talk about how the trade agreements can be used as well to calculate that unit price. So my standard price is $100. I have a trade agreement set up. Well, I want to charge by the different quantities. A trade agreement is essentially for different billing scenarios where you can have a price break based on the quantity that a customer is purchasing or that you're selling to your customer. So my quantity of 15, you can see my unit price went down to 90. If I enter a quantity of 26, then my unit price goes down to 80. So the more you buy, the cheaper each one is. That's basically how the standard pricing can work with those trade agreements. Now, if I change this to tier, which is another option for our pricing methods, you can see my unit price changed again to $93.46. This is based on the different tiers that I have set up for my trade agreement. I'll go into my view billing detail, as this will give us the information on how that is calculated. With tier pricing, it actually bases it on each tier, so each tier is calculated separately. So my first tier is 0 to 10 quantity, my unit price is 100, and the bill quantity is 10, so it multiplies that out for $1,000. The next tier is 10 to 25, unit price of 90, quantity of 15, and it calculates that. And then finally, I have one in the last tier for $80. So it takes the net amount for those 3 different tiers and adds them together to get the $24.30 and divides by 26. Then we get the $93.46. So that's how tier pricing works. It takes the amount from each of those tiers that you have set up for that item. The last pricing method that we have is flat tier. Flat tier is used if you want to charge one price for any quantity in that bracket or that tier. So in my case, I have a quantity of 26. My flat amount is $3,700, which we see in the net amount field. And that's the amount that is going to use to calculate that unit price, just using the quantity to divide. So that's how the flat tier works. Now I have my trade agreement open so we can see how that looks, just so you can get a visual. So for my online storage, you can see here's where I set up my from and to quantities. This would be my tier amount, and then the flat tier amount for each of those different trade agreements that we have set up. So that's how the trade agreement looks and is used on the billing schedule. Another option that we have to use is escalation and discounts when we're setting up our items. So I have a different billing schedule here where I've set up my escalation and a discount. So for my support item, I have it set up for 2 years, starting and ending on January of 22 and ending on December of 23. Now, if I look at my unit price here is $500 and I'm billing them monthly. If I go to my escalation and discount, you'll see that here I have an escalation starting in January of 2023, so the next year, and it's going to base that on the consumer price index. Now, if I look at my consumer price index that is set up, you can see in January of 2023, the index is 107, and that's basically 107%. So whatever the price is this year, billing each month of $500, it's going to increase that by 7% the next year. So 500 times 7% is 535. So if I go look at the billing detail on my billing schedule line, you can see that this year it bills $500 each month. And then starting with the next year, if I scroll down, it's going to be 535. That's one way that you can do the escalation. You can also go into the escalation and just enter a 5% increase if you wanted to do that. Basing it on the consumer price index just lets you enter the consumer price index once, and if that fluctuates up and down, then it will do the increase or the decrease based on that consumer price index. Now the other option is to allow a discount. So I have my training item set up here for my quarterly billing, and in my escalation and discount, I have it discount marked. So if you do want to do a discount, you need to mark the checkbox. I have a 5% discount for just the first year. So it ends in December of 2022. So if I go look at the view billing detail for this one, you'll see that for my first quarterly billing, it's going to discount $150, and then the next year it does not. So a simple way to just give a discount for a customer if they want to do that. And that concludes the pricing and escalation and discount.
That covers the pricing. Our next demo will go into all of the invoicing scenarios. So just a couple of quick notes on the invoicing scenarios. The demos will be based on the option rate off of a billing schedule. At the end of the demo, we'll cover kind of how to do it across multiple customers or multiple billing schedules. It was just for illustration purposes that we're using that just to make it easier for everybody to follow along. And then I'll cover a little bit about a top billing scenario at the end when the video is done.
Hi, today we're going to look and explore at the invoicing process for a billing schedule. So today we'll start in the billing schedules. So when invoicing, we can either create a sales order or a free text invoice, and we can also choose if we want to automatically invoice that sales order or free text invoice that we create. We'll take a look at this process from an individual billing schedule perspective. However, we'll call out at a couple points here too that there are batch jobs that can be used and scheduled for this purpose. We'll start with a simple example as far as showing billing in arrears versus billing in advance. So we're going to take a look at this billing schedule here that I have, which is billing schedule 15. So on here I have a customer account of customer 005, which is Contoso Retail Seattle, which has one line on it. And it's covering the dates of September 1st through August 31st of next year. And this is on a monthly basis. So if we look at the billing detail here, we'll see that our billing periods are aligned to the month, and we haven't billed anything here as of yet with this particular billing schedule. So what we'll do is we'll go to generate invoice, knowing that our first monthly billing is spanning the month of September. If we wanted to bill in advance, we can do that by filtering by the start date. So I'll mark start date here for my filter, and then I'll have a date here. For instance, I'll just leave it at September 6th, for example, and then I'm going to click on View Billing Schedules at the bottom. And you'll see here that it'll come up with one line, and that line is covering my September 1st through September 30th billing period. So that's how we can bill in advance. If you wanted to bill in arrears, if I just cancel here, you can do that. We'll just go to Generate Invoice here, and instead we can filter by the end date. So now we're looking for an end date that meets the criteria. In this case, if I click View Billing Schedules with 9/6 marked, you'll see that I'll get nothing returned. However, if I were to plug in, for instance, like 9/30, which meets our criteria here for the end of the month, we'll now get one line back. So it'll match that 9/1 to 9/30 billing period. So that's how we can select whether we want to bill in arrears or in advance. So it all comes back to this generate invoice. Do we want to use the start date or the end date on this particular form? Jumping into our next example, we have an ability to consolidate prior periods. So we'll open up this billing schedule here that I have set up for that. So here we have a billing schedule that's running from January 1st to December 31st. This one, once again, is monthly. So if we look at our billing detail here, we'll see that we have monthly billings running from January through December. Now, when we go to invoice this particular item, when we go to generate invoice, I'll just go by start date again, like we did in our last example. And I'm going to set 9/6/2022 as my date. Now, when I click View Billing Schedules, now I have the option at the bottom here where I can choose my consolidation options. So I can say consolidate all periods. And if I do that, and then I click on my preview invoice, what's going to happen is I'll see that I have a preview. So preview 1 for my sales order number. But you'll see that the 9 months, so January through September, are consolidated at $250 each for a total of $22.50. So that's going to create one sales order line when it passes this over to a sales order, whether I do the creation or the invoice. And I do have an example of one here where to show what happens after it's been invoiced. So this is just a copy of that other billing schedule, and I'd already invoiced it, so I saved us some time here of the processing. So you'll see that in the view billing detail, the first 9 months here are marked as billed. They all went to sales order 861, and then they're all here on invoice 717. So I'll click on the link here to take us to sales order 861. So here we'll see that sales order line for the 9, so 1 per month, January through September, at a price of $250, giving us the $22.50. And then if we wanted to see the invoice, we could either go through the typical sales order path here to get to the invoice journal and view that invoice. So here I'll just pull up the original invoice here real quick. And we can see the invoice here will have one line for a quantity of 9 at $250 for a $22.50 total. So that's consolidate prior periods. The next example, we'll look at a couple different concepts here. We're going to look at consolidate by customer. So here I have 2 billing schedules, 12 and 13 for customers US 008. Each of these has some lines on it, and you'll see that the billing start dates don't necessarily align. One is running from 3/1/2022, and one is running from 1/1/2022. As I mentioned in the beginning, we do have batch jobs that can be done or periodic jobs that can be done to use these, so you don't have to be right on the billing schedule form. I'm going to use this form here, the generate invoice form from periodic, to do our example here for consolidating customer. And then I'm going to plug in a filter. So my filter is going to be billing schedule 12 and billing schedule 13. So you'll see that's my filter. When I click OK, I can view billing schedules. And you'll see here that I'll see billing schedule information for 12 and 13. Obviously, the number of lines is going to be a little bit different, given that one started on 3/1 and one started on 1/1. Now, the consolidation options, I can choose consolidate by customer, and then I can preview my invoice. And you'll see that in my sales order number here, these are all going to be on preview 1. You won't see preview 2 here. So when this gets copied over and created as a sales order invoice, we will get one invoice for the 2 billing schedules, and then they'll all link to that particular one as far as the invoice is concerned. So we can go through here and we'll generate all, and this is going to actually do our posting as well, based on my option that I had selected. So now if we go back into our billing schedule form, we can either go to billing schedule 12 or 13. In this case, it's not going to matter because we consolidated them together. So here I have my one line that started on 3/1. If I go to my view billing detail here, I'll see that I have a reference to sales order 864 for those lines and invoice 720. And if I go to my second billing schedule, which was 13, and I look at the view billing detail here, we'll also see the same thing, 864 and 720. So consolidated those 2 billing schedules together. If we wanted to pull up the invoice here, we can do that, and we can take a look at the original invoice here as it was created. So then here are all our lines. Now, obviously, we could do further consolidation here by item, which I didn't do, but this will give you those 2 billing schedules in one invoice. Our next example that we'll talk about is consolidating by item. So we've got an example here where I have 2 lines out of one billing schedule. The lines don't have the same exact start and end dates. But what happens here is I can consolidate and then get one line on my invoice with a quantity of 2 instead of 1 for those periods where there is overlap. So for instance, if I were to bill this month or up through this month, we'll be able to see that in our example. So if I click on generate invoice here, so we'll leave our date, and then once again, we'll go to view billing schedules. And then in our consolidation options, we want to consolidate by item, and then I'll preview my invoice. And you'll see once we get to the periods that have the overlap, so March and forward, you'll see that I had a quantity of 2 for those particular periods. So those will create one line for a quantity of 2 for that period on that invoice. If we wanted to look at a posted example, we can do that. We've got one here for consolidate by item. So here I'll just grab any of these. So we could start with this particular one here. And if we go to the sales order, we'll see that we have multiple lines. So January, February, March, April, and starting in March, you'll see that we have our quantity of 2. And because I had these all on one invoice, they'd all show up like you see here, single lines on one invoice because they weren't consolidated by prior period. The next topic that we'll talk about is called top billing. So think of this as like a buy 2, get 1 free, those type of scenarios, like a BOGO, that type of thing too. So in this case, I have 3 lines on my billing schedule. So I have S0001, S0021, and then another line for S0001. So these are all part of the same item group called services. So in our setup, we can specify a number of top lines, which means the top, whatever that number of lines is what you will bill for. So in my case, I have that set to 2. So basically I'm saying we'll bill for the top 2 lines and anything else will be non-chargeable, but will be included. So in this case, when we go and invoice, we'll get an invoice for 2. So S0001 and S0001 again, because they're both $250. And then the $150 for insurance here won't be shown. You'll see that line item, but it'll have no price on it. So how this works is when we go to the generate invoice, we keep our settings like we have them. And then what we'll do is we will go to the view billing schedules here and then click on consolidation. And then we want to split by item group because this needs to be on to do our top billing example. And when I click on view preview here, I want you to notice there's a column here called amount. So you'll see that the amount for the S0021 item is 0. And that's because it met the criteria for top billing. So that one was zeroed out and the other 2 were billed. So when we generate our invoice, we'll get an invoice for 500, but all 3 lines will show on that invoice. So as an example, we'll take a look at a posted one here that we have. So same lines, and we'll just go to the billing detail on any of these lines, and we can look at the sales order here. So what happens is when this gets transferred over to the sales order, you'll see our line here for insurance came over with no unit price. And then when we did invoice this, the invoice then brought that line over on the invoice to show it, but with a 0 price. So here you'll see we're billing for the top 2 lines, and then the 3rd line is free. Our next example that we'll cover is for free text invoice. So we've seen in the examples that we've shown so far that we've been using a sales order as our vehicle to do our invoicing. You can also use free text invoice. So these are the 2 options. Once you have lines on a billing schedule, you can't change from sales order to free text invoice or from free text invoice to sales order, you'll have to delete the lines and then add them back. And that's because when you use free text invoice, you won't reference an item down here. You'll have a description, and you'll have to fill in the main account on the account tab in the line details. So the form will display a little bit differently, and you'll see that in the view billing detail, it'll look a little different as well. You'll see a little bit less information here in the grid, just in terms of you'll have a link to the free text invoice, but you won't have the separate columns for sales order and sales order invoice here. So in our example, we have a $250 recurring charge here that's happening. You'll also see that on a free text invoice, the pricing method will default as flat. And Jodi mentioned that earlier in her demo, that in order to edit the price, you'll need to be flat here. Standard wouldn't allow you to edit that price. So when you use a free text invoice, we'll default this to flat to allow for that editing. Here, the process is relatively similar. Same process here. And then when we go to view billing schedules, you'll see your line here for your free text invoice. And we do have an invoiced one here that I will show. So in this case, in the view billing detail, we'll have the one link back to the free text invoice. And then here we'll have our free text invoice that was created, our main account coming from those line details on that billing schedule. And in our last example, we'll talk a little bit about consumption items. So there's an option for excluding zero consumption items. So in our case, I have this billing schedule that has a standard line and a usage line. And we're going to just take a look at the view billing detail of the usage line here real quick. And we'll see that I have usage in October and November, but I have no usage in September, sorry. So in this case, I want to exclude that from showing up on the invoice. So I can do that when we generate our invoice. So we're going to look at September here, and then we want to exclude zero consumption. So that's this flag here. And then when we go to view billing schedules, we'll see that we'll create a line for only that standard line that we had. So this isn't the usage line. If we were to back up here and change this to no, we'll see that we'll have two lines, but one of these is coming over with no quantity because this is the consumption where we didn't have any consumption in that particular period. So in that case, when you exclude zero consumption, that item doesn't get transferred to the sales order and thus doesn't show up on the invoice either. So that's a choice to be made there. And then just while we're here, I want to cover a couple other items here that we didn't get to in depth with examples, but I'll talk to them here. For the posting option, you'll have a few different options here. You can create a sales order. So obviously this is tied to the sales order transaction type. You can show the posting invoice form. So for instance, when you're in an invoice or a sales order and you click invoice, you get the invoice pop-up that comes up and you can fill out that dialog form. You could get that particular form to pop up at the creation time. So once you hit generate the invoice here, that's what you'd get, is that pop-up. You can choose create free text invoice, which would just create the free text invoice, so it's not going to post it. Then our last option is to post the invoice automatically. So if you had service items that don't require any warehousing or any movements, you could potentially use post invoice automatically like I did in my examples here. If you wanted to stop at a free text invoice or at a sales order, then you can use the create options. So create free text invoice or create sales order. And then just lastly, I wanted to cover the generate invoice batch processing. So you'll see this under the periodic tasks. So here you can fill out a lot of that same information we filled out in the dialog, but then you can have this run as a batch job. So then you can tell this to increment, however many days or months. So if you bill on a monthly cadence, you could plug in here months and then 1 month. And then what it would do is it'll skip ahead by that number of months. So when it's doing its billing to look for those dates. So those are some of the options we have here as far as invoicing a billing schedule.
That was our billing demo. And what we want to do real quick is to jump over to our roadmap just briefly here to address any questions, because we did have some questions that came up earlier that can be covered by going through the roadmap. So I'll start with kind of the teal color here, which is kind of where we were at GA. So at 10.25 is when we GA'd this particular product. So we had the reporting, insights, analytics, revenue and expense deferrals, recurring contract billing, price management, Mira, those particular pieces. Where we're heading in the future, we're doing some enhancements around quotations. So as you kind of move up different versions, you'll see that in multiple phases we're adding in the ability to quotation or quote a customer through a billing schedule. Then we'll get to a point where we're able to do dual write and such through that particular option as well. We're also working on integration with project. So this is, think of this as more of the project accounting piece. So getting those particular pieces in place and integrated. Split billing, as customers move forward here and as you get to 10.0 to 29 or 30, I can't remember exactly which one it's 29, will have the split billing feature included in it. So that gives you the ability to have a billing schedule, and you can also have an additional customer or customers that split that billing, and you can assign a share to each of those customers. Longer term, having the ability for a customer to self-service their contract and their billing schedule. So that could be potentially through a Power App or through some kind of integration there. So it might be like a roll page type scenario too. Additions and improvements on e-commerce and credit card processing. So getting some integration into the commerce pieces, the continuity orders and things of that nature in there, and then improving the processing of credit cards across the board. And then lastly, the billing service. So think of this more as not a subscription billing piece, but something that's across the board for all of the invoicing that we do in Dynamics Finance. So for instance, maybe I use CE, maybe I use Project Ops, maybe I use whatever, but I want to use or utilize the billing pieces that are available in finance. I could use this service to produce my invoices and then print those out. If anybody had any more needs, then they would move more into the Dynamics Finance space. So that's a little bit on the roadmap. One question that we got in the earlier tech talk I wanted to bring up here was around top billing. So if you recall the scenario that I had for top billing, I had 3 lines. One that had a quantity of 1 at 250, one that had a quantity of 1 at 250, and then another that had a quantity of 1 at 150. That top billing piece is going to look at the top 2 prices or totals for the lines. So for instance, if I had multiple quantities on there, it's going to take the highest 2 lines as far as price, and those are going to be what gets billed, and then the lowest price one would be the one that would get excluded from the billing as far as price-wise. So obviously, if you had 10 lines and you did 2 top billing lines, it would take the 2 top invoice lines as far as the number or the quantity and the price is concerned. So the total net amount for those lines. Don't have really any questions to summarize from the session today. Now is a good time if you wanted to get your questions in. Go ahead and get those submitted through the Q&A panel. If you have questions and you don't want to submit them through the Q&A here, you can also use the email address that's on the slide right now, so you can reach out to us that way as well. Right, with that, I'll thank everybody. I'm going to turn it over to Michaela to wrap us up.
Thanks, Brian. As you can see, I have posted a link to a short survey in the Q&A panel. Just a couple of questions. We'd love to get your feedback on today's session and hear what you'd like to see in future events. So thank you for your participation in that. As a reminder, the recording of today's session will be available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. And last, I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenters and to you, audience, for joining us today.